جمال الوجود بذكر الإله وتصفو الحياة بنور هدى جمال الوجود بذكر.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على سيد المرسلين وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. اللهم ربنا لك الحمد حمدا كثيرا طيبا مباركا فيه. اللهم إنا نعوذ بك منك لا نحصي ثناء عليك أنت كما أثنيت على نفسك. اللهم اغفر لنا ذنوبنا وكفر عنا سيئاتنا وتوفنا مع الأبرار. أما بعد، السلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته. First and foremost, we thank Allah Azza wa Jal for giving us the opportunity to be here. For without Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we would not be doing what we are doing. And secondly, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has beautifully taught us, لا يشكر الله من لا يشكر الناس. Whosoever does not thank people does not thank Allah. So jazakum Allah khair to the organizers for this mammoth of a task, for this, the Arabs say, juhud jabbar. It's a mighty effort. May Allah Azza wa Jal accept it. That's the main thing from all of us. And as we were reminded just before, our intentions. As long as Allah Ta'ala accepts this amal, then alhamdulillah. That's the main thing. Also, as a Palestinian, I must acknowledge the genocide that is taking place right now in Gaza and the suffering of the Palestinian people and many other indigenous people in the world. And we ask Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala to remove their sufferings, but also to accept their shuhada, to give health and well-being to their injured, to soothe the pain of the mothers and the fathers and the children, and to relieve this tyranny and oppression as soon as possible. But also, as one who comes from Australia, I also must acknowledge that we come from a place that belongs to the indigenous people of Australia, the Ghana land, who have also equally been persecuted, just like the Palestinians are, whose lands were stolen and colonized. And so therefore, we pay respect to their elders, past, present, and emerging. My respected imams, ulama, shuyukh, brothers and sisters, today I want to talk about tajdeed, and I want to talk about three things. The what is tajdeed, why tajdeed, and how tajdeed. But before that, allow me to give some context, and I'll do so briefly. The modern schooling system, as we know today, emerged during the 18th and the 19th centuries in Europe and North America. Now, it was a creation, or its creation was not neutral. I think this is a very important point to consider. The creation of the modern schooling system was not neutral, but it was based on a secular worldview. Again, a very important thing to keep in mind. And the secular worldview, briefly, education tends to focus on the empirical knowledge, critical thinking, and personal and societal utility. Its primary aim is often the preparation of individuals for economic productivity, civic engagement, or personal fulfillment, with values and ethics viewed as culturally constructed or individually chosen. By contrast, of course, the Islamic worldview, which is a theistic worldview, projects a radically different vision of education, which we will be talking about, inshallah. The modern schooling system was designed to produce obedient, disciplined citizens who could serve the state. It emphasized punctuality. It emphasized punctuality, hierarchy, standardization, and uniformity. And it was deeply tied to the needs of industrializing societies and the formation of modern nation states. There was a critique, of course, much critique emerged regarding the modern schooling system, and this is perhaps the most salient points about this critique. One is that it is an industrial legacy, even though economies have shifted towards post-industrial digital and service-based structures, and now AI, schools still retain that model. rigid timetables, subject silos, age-based cohorts, and standardized assessment. The other critique is that social control and compliance. Schools are often critiqued for functioning as instruments of social control. Foucault, for example, compares schools to prisons in how they regulate time, space, and behavior. And the emphasis on obedience, grading, surveillance cultivates compliant citizens who accept existing hierarchies rather than critically challenging them and focusing on the inward development of themselves. There's economic reductionism, meaning schools became framed as workforce preparation, measured by employability and economic productivity, and cultural homogenization, meaning that schools have been criticized for enforcing, again, a very important point to keep in mind, Eurocentric, secular frameworks, often sidelining deliberately indigenous, religious, or alternative ways of knowing, erasing cultural diversity and local wisdom traditions while reinforcing epistemological dominance. This is also a key point to keep in mind. And last but not least, the critique of modern schooling is that it has had immense psychological and social impact. And I won't go through this, I think it's obvious. But to this critique, in order to respond to the problems of modern schooling, there were several alternative models proposed. One, some people propose holistic education, addressing the intellectual, moral, spiritual, and physical development. Other models were democratic and participatory schooling, where learners are co-creators, not passive recipients. There was the contextualized curricula that reflect local cultures, histories, and needs. But also there was education for meaning and purpose. These are different responses to the problems of modern schooling. So rather than only economic productivity, they said we have to focus on other things. And because of that, there were different and distinct philosophies of education that emerged. And these are some of the most prominent ones: the Montessori, the Waldorf, the Reggio Emilia. And I need to emphasize here, and you need to underline this, that there were distinct philosophies that emerged from a certain worldview. In other words, and I'm not going to go through these models, but they felt that in order to respond to the problems of modern schooling, they needed to come up with an alternative based not just from an empty pocket, but on a certain philosophical thinking derived from a certain worldview. So each of these philosophies or these models of schooling has its own distinct philosophy derived from its own distinct Islamic worldview. And that's why, as a cautionary remark, when you adopt any of those, be mindful of that also, so that you're not superimposing, wittingly or otherwise, their philosophies and their worldviews. And you see, for example, Montessori said the child-centered development of a whole person through self-directed activity, hands-on learning, and so forth. In other words, they had something in mind they wanted to achieve. They wanted to raise this child or this student in a certain way for a certain purpose. Now, Islamic schools also, as we know them today, particularly those established in the West or within post-colonial Muslim majority countries, have been, whether we admit or not, but it is the case, have been deeply influenced by the origins and structures of modern schooling system. After independence, for example, many Muslim societies retained these frameworks, either because they were already institutionalized or because they were seen as necessary for national development and economic competitiveness. In fact, anyone who studied British imperialism and colonization knows there was a deliberate effort to replace existing educational models with British. And in fact, in the Islamic world, as anyone who studied Islamic history would know, two, for example, significantly important institutions that kept the Islamic civilization going were their distinct education model and the awqaf system, the endowment system, both of which were destroyed and replaced by the British and other colonizers. So as a result, in other words, Muslim societies that were influenced by post-colonialism, they inherited these models of schools. And we in the West have the same models operating in the same structures. As a result, even when, and here's the dilemma, even when Islamic schools in Western nations, or Muslim majority nations, in fact, aim for holistic formation that nurtures the spiritual, intellectual, and physical development of learners, they are bound by inherited structures rooted in industrial and nation-state logic, founded on a certain philosophical logic and worldview. In other words, you want to escape, but you find yourself constrained. And this created one of the most important dilemmas for Islamic schools, and that is an inherent tension. And the tension is this: while the purpose of Islamic schooling aspires to nurture taqwa, ethically grounded learners, refined akhlaq, the structures, by structures I don't mean the physical structures, but the epistemic, the philosophical structures, the structures of the worldview that were inherited and imposed, through which this happens, are still shaped by Western systems designed for compliance, productivity, and, as some would say, social control. Thus, many Islamic schools have become absorbed by neoliberal pressures, shifting towards market-driven models that prioritize secular academic success while sidelining the purposeful aims of Islamic school. And I will be focusing quite a bit today on the difference between purposeful aims and instrumental aims, inshallah. So this dilemma led Islamic schools to respond in several ways. And these are the two often used responses, which I would like to respectfully call band-aid solutions. One was the appendage model, which involves adopting state-mandated curricula wholesale and supplementing them with Islamic studies as a discrete subject, or integration entailing the infusion of Islamic values and perspectives throughout the curriculum. The problem with that is that there were still ongoing tensions. Some of the tensions that Islamic schools, and by that I say many, there might be some exceptional cases, but this is you could say, the norm. One, for example, one of the tensions that Islamic schools have a hybrid approach that feels out of place, with an external Islamic ethos that is often perceived as stale, irrelevant, and decontextualized. Another tension is a disconnect between the intended Islamic educational aims and student experiences. You find this often in Islamic studies and Arabic studies particularly. Thirdly, and this is also of paramount importance, educators in Islamic schools increasingly face a moral tension between their aspiration to nurture spiritually grounded learners and the pressures of a neoliberal system. And last but not least, governance models in many Islamic schools are often antithetical to Islamic governance, reflecting bureaucratic control rather than principled, consultative, and value-driven control. Because of these tensions, there is a call for tajdeed. But what is tajdeed? And this is also important for us because, for clarity, before I came, for example, to this conference, I was visiting Melbourne, and I was meeting with some very respectable shuyukh who run some respectable Darul Ulooms and Islamic schools. And believe it or not, Brother Zafar, that one of the reasons they didn't want to attend this conference because of the title Tajdeed. And that is because there is an inherent concern and perhaps it's a right concern, it's a good concern, that maybe by tajdeed we are going to be diluting the faith. And we're going to be compromising fundamental principles of Islam or Islamic educational philosophy for the sake of tajdeed. For it is true that tajdeed, or under the guise of tajdeed, there has been many problematic initiatives. So when we speak about tajdeed, or when I speak about tajdeed, I'm not bringing anything new. I'm not going to define tajdeed. I'm not inventing a definition of tajdeed, but rather I will share with you how tajdeed is understood from the primary sources and the views of leading scholars. And that's how our approach should be, right? So first, if you go to the etymological origins of tajdeed, if you look at the dictionaries, Ummahat al-Kutub, the dictionaries, or you'll find that tajdeed conveys the meaning of making something new or restoring it to its original state. The Quran does not speak of tajdeed as such, but there is a verse in Surah Al-Kahf where Allah Tabarak wa Ta'ala says, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم وقالوا إذا كنا عظاما ورفاتا أئنا لمبعوثون خلقا جديدا. That's the closest that it comes to, where Allah Ta'ala says, or in the ayah, the disbelievers question whether after becoming bones and decayed, rufat, when they died and they became bones, will they be resurrected a new creation, jadida. But that doesn't tell us much about tajdeed. We'll have to go to the hadith to see about tajdeed. And yesterday, my dear respected brother and Dr. Abdullah mentioned about aspects of tajdeed, and you mentioned this morning. There are several ahadith, which are all sahih ahadith, that perhaps give us something about tajdeed. عبد الله بن عمرو بن العاص رضي الله عنهما قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم إن الإيمان لا يخلق في جوف أحدكم كما يخلق الثوب فاسألوا الله أن يجدد الإيمان في قلوبكم. In this hadith, tajdeed is used where Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, the meaning of the translation or the meaning of the hadith, faith wears out inside any of you, like garments wear out. So ask Allah Ta'ala to renew, yujaddidu, faith in your hearts. This is in Sahih al-Hakim and al-Tabarani. The emphasis of the above is on tajdeed at the individual level. As you have mentioned, and I'll come back to this later when we talk about teacher formation or teacher education. There is the other hadith which is sahih also in Sunan Abi Dawud. عن أبي هريرة رضي الله عنه قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم إن الله يبعث لهذه الأمة على رأس كل 100 سنة من يجدد لها دينها. As you mentioned last night. Allah Ta'ala indeed will send to this ummah at the turn of every 100 years someone who will renew for this ummah its deen. So based on this, the ulama did not leave us without a definition, the classical and contemporary ulama. And so if they have come up with a definition, I don't see the need for me to define it anew. For example, the grand imam, the mujaddid of the 10th century, Jalaluddin al-Suyuti, rahmatullah alayhi, stated, and this is a translation of what he said, and I'm always very particular about, I'm very pedantic about translation. We have problems with it, and we'll talk about it later. But he said, tajdeed in deen means renewal of its guidance, explanation of its truth, as well as eradication of innovation, bid'ah, or eradication of extremism, ghulu, or laxity in deen, and observance of people's benefits, societal traditions, and the norms of civilizations and sharia. Early scholars highlighted tajdeed also involved addressing new challenges and evolving circumstances in human life. My screen just decided to go to sleep, so just give me 1 second. So the late Yusuf al-Qaradawi, rahmatullah alayhi, Sheikh Yusuf al-Qaradawi, offered a refined understanding of tajdeed, emphasizing that it does not mean replacing or discarding the original, but rather preserving its core essence while addressing areas that have weakened or deteriorated. He also said, tajdeed of something does not mean to remove it and replace it by something entirely new. This is not what tajdeed is. Tajdeed, rather, he said, is of something means to retain its essence, hallmarks, and distinct characteristics while renovating any parts that have deteriorated and strengthening any parts that have weakened. The renewal of deen means renewal of our faith in it, understanding and comprehension of it, renewing our commitment to it, practicing its commands, and renewing the call to it. And so in others, so that is probably the definition we will go by. So the scope of tajdeed usually for the ulama, and of course would know this very well, that tajdeed was often associated with fiqh and usul al-fiqh, jurisprudence and usul. However, many preeminent scholars, like for example Abu al-Hasan Ali al-Nadwi, rahmatullah alayhi, well known to everybody, argued that tajdeed was not limited to fuqaha and jurists, but also included rulers, scholars, and Sufi figures. Likewise, Wahba al-Zuhayli, he said, advocated tajdeed across multiple fields. Essentially, they talked about civilizational tajdeed. So there is individual, institutional, and civilizational tajdeed. And so the tajdeed, therefore, can be by individuals, a collection of individuals, institution or institutions, or at a broader level. But we must be mindful that tajdeed for us does not mean reformation. It doesn't read reformation because the label is full of a well-articulated political and ideological position that inherently reformation assumes that the Islamic tradition contains deficiencies that need correction and modernizing rectification, and that's not what we mean. But also I would like to argue, although it might be semantics, that it is not revival either, and I don't have time to go through why, for example, Imam Ghazali rahmatullah alayhi chose Ihya Ulumuddin and not Tajdeed Ulumuddin. That's a different discussion. I don't have time for that. But it also does not mean abandoning the past for the present. It is the middle of these two extremes. And it is not an entitlement to advance reformist, modernist, or progressive positions at variance with the historical, legal, moral, ethical, and spiritual corpus of Islam. I think this is also important. So then, if that is what tajdeed is, then why tajdeed? First and foremost, for philosophical alignment. To realign the philosophy, vision, and practice of schooling with the distinct philosophy of Islamic pedagogy derived from the Islamic worldview. Tajdeed, in this case, offers an alternative to conventional school improvement and effectiveness paradigm by shifting the focus from technical fixes and performances and performance matrix to a deeper, purpose-driven renewal rooted in the Islamic worldview. Consider this. Imagine a masjid being constructed directly on the foundation of a Gothic cathedral without altering the base design. The arches, windows, and orientation are all meant for another purpose, facing east rather than Qibla, for example. Even if you paint it with Islamic calligraphy and add a minaret, the foundation itself is misaligned. The lesson, the Western schooling system is built on a different philosophical foundation. Cosmetic changes, adding Islamic studies or Arabic studies, don't fix the fundamental misalignment. Or consider the following. Facades versus structure. Picture a traditional Islamic courtyard house, which naturally regulates light, temperature, and privacy, compared to a European villa that emphasizes open facades and visibility. If you place an Islamic mashrabiyya, or the lattice, on a European villa, the facade looks Islamic, but the house still functions according to the design of European villa. The lesson: many Islamic schools add Islamic facades, uniforms, prayer rooms, Quran classes onto Western schooling structures. But the educational process itself, assessment, curriculum logic, graduate outcomes, still reflect the Western model. You following, or you thinking of morning tea? You following? Also consider this. Transplanting a glass-walled skyscraper designed for New York into the middle of the Arabian desert. The climate, cultural needs, and community use are entirely different. Air conditioning and water systems will constantly struggle because the design isn't suited to the environment. Lesson: Western schooling models are designed for industrial, modernist societies with secular aims. When transplanted into Islamic schooling, they often struggle to serve holistic purposes. So these analogies, my friends, demonstrate a crucial point here, that form without philosophical alignment creates ongoing tension. To achieve purposeful aims, the philosophical foundation and architecture, I don't mean physical, of the school itself must be reconsidered, not just decorated. So that's the why we want tajdeed, because of the misalignment. Secondly, tajdeed is required because it is an amana. And Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, this is one of many ahadith. ما من عبد يسترعيه الله رعية يموت يوم يموت وهو غاش لرعيته إلا حرم الله عليه الجنة. This should make us shiver, this hadith, where Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam says that if somebody is given responsibility over others and dies while deceiving those in their care, Allah will forbid them from entering Jannah. This, the ulama commenting on this, they say al-ra'iyya here, this is the responsibility of looking after others, could be am or khas, general or specific. General here means anyone, whether you have children at home or family at home, or you're looking after a school, this hadith applies to you. If you stand on the day of judgment before Allah Ta'ala, and He says, you had the responsibility over 1,000 children, or whatever, and you said you were Islamic, but did you fulfill that amana? Did you really do what it takes to fulfill that amana? So it is an amana, and we will be questioned, and the situation is more dangerous or more acute because you have some of the most vulnerable people in the society under your care, the children. But also, tajdeed is required because my pointer is not working. That's why we need tajdeed. Here we go. Tajdeed is required, and I take this from Professor Pazi Salberg, who was our keynote speaker in our conference called on assessment, Are We Assessing What Matters Most? And he has demonstrated to us that the global trends in education shows that despite everything that we are doing and all the money that we are pumping into schools and all the cosmetic changes that we are doing, that everything is dropping. Equality of education, student achievement, student well-being, student engagement is all dropping. So as he said, something is wrong. But also importantly, tajdeed is required to achieve coherence, to restore coherence in Islamic schools by realigning the pedagogy, the curriculum, the leadership, the governance, the assessment, and so on, with clear educational aims that cultivate the holistic learner, and not just bring a new curriculum. That doesn't fix it. Now, on the question of how, the first and the most important thing I would like to propose for tajdeed is that we we don't need to invent a new distinct philosophy of education. We have it. But just as Ibn Khaldun rahmatullah alayhi says, an occupied people imitate the occupier. An intellectual occupation is worse than physical occupation. We have it, we just need to believe in it, and we need to bring it back to the fore. So we need to start with a distinct philosophy of education, Islamic pedagogy with a big P, as my dear brothers Dylan and Nadeem keep telling me, Islamic pedagogy with a big P, not a small p. Islamic pedagogy grounded in Islamic tradition. Again, this is not the time to explain what that is, but Islamic pedagogy for us refers to the educational purpose that informs the institutional practice. In other words, the why, what, and how we teach is not arbitrary, it's not haphazard, but reflects Islam's purposeful aims of education. Islamic pedagogy is a philosophical commitment and is one that informs the way an educator views the learner, for example, the purpose of learning, and their role and praxis as an educator. These philosophical commitments inform the way or the unique expressions of education colored by a distinct purpose manifest within and beyond Islamic educational settings. Secondly, we must understand purpose. And for that, let me remind myself and yourselves, as the shuyukh here would know, there is the ulama, they devised something called ulum al-ala and ulum al-maqasid. Ulum al-ala, instrumental sciences, and ulum al-maqasid, purposeful sciences. Ulum al-ala, the instrumental sciences, the disciplines that are employed to understand, for example, the revealed text and to acquire purposeful sciences, meaning they are instruments to achieve a purpose. The ulum al-maqasid are the ultimate purpose. For example, you study Arabic, grammar and morphology or whatever. The study of Arabic nahu and sarf and grammar is not the ultimate aim. It is the means to allow you to understand Arabic. And the study of Arabic is not the ultimate aim, but it is the tool to allow you to understand the wahi. Right? Just like there are instrumental tools or aims and purposeful aims in fiqh, there is also purposeful aims or ghayat and instrumental aims, wasail, for Islamic education and schooling. Now, we can derive some of these purposeful aims directly from the Quran. For example, 3 of those ayat, وَمَا خَلَقْتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسَ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ. Here Allah Ta'ala categorically says, there's no ambiguity about this. I have created jinn and ins for my ibadah. لِيَعْبُدُونَ has been, as the mashayikh here know and others, the mufassirun says it could mean لِيَعْرِفُونَ أو لِيَعْبُدُونَ, to know Allah, the ultimate purpose of all things, the precise reason for creation, and everything else associated with that creation is the ma'rifatullah and the ibadatullah. فَعْلَمْ أَنَّهُ لَا إِلَهَ إِلَّا اللَّهِ, and know that there is no ilah illallah. إِنَّمَا يَخْشَى اللَّهَ مِنْ عِبَادِهِ الْعُلَمَاء. Only those of his servants who have ilm are those who truly have khashya of Allah. Meaning, the more khashya, the more you are a alim. In other words, ilm is not by the amount of information you store, but it is by the impact that information has had on your transformation to make you a person who have khashya of Allah. Now, from these, we can say that, and I would like to argue, that the purposeful aims of all Islamic schools, and I don't think there should be a difference here, the purposeful aims of all Islamic schools should be ma'rifatullah and the ubudiyyah. Together, ma'rifatullah and ubudiyyah are the inner foundation that manifests outwardly. Right? Ma'rifatullah, to know Allah. This hadith, for example, which is a very famous hadith, Ibn Abbas radiallahu anhu says, I was behind Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Ibn Abbas was a ghulam, remember. Ghulam, some say, is under 9 years old, under 10. And look what he's teaching him. Ya Ghulam, inni u'allimuka kalimat. I am teaching you some words, ilm. I'm giving you some ilm, some knowledge, some teaching. احفظ الله يحفظك. احفظ الله تجده تجاهك. Protect Allah and Allah will be with you. Protect Allah's commands. In this famous hadith, Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam is teaching a child and summarizing the essence of ma'rifatullah and ubudiyya. And I always say never underestimate the intelligence of children and your students. Right? So this is the ma'rifatullah. Ibn Rajab rahmatullah alayhi said, the most virtuous knowledge is knowledge of Allah, knowledge of His names, attributes and actions, which obliges the one who possesses it to know Allah, to fear Him, to love Him, to hold Him in awe, to glorify Him, to magnify Him, to devote himself to Him, to rely upon, to be patient with Him, to be content with Him, and to be preoccupied with Him rather than with His creation. This is the maqsad of ilm. This is the purpose of knowledge. This is the purpose of education. This is the purpose of school, the purposeful aim. Al-Asfahani rahmatullah alayhi said, some scholars said the first obligation Allah imposed upon His creations is to know Him. Once the people know Allah, they will worship Allah. Allah Most High said, so no, there is no ilah illallah, there is no God except Allah. Imam Ahmad narrated, there's a beautiful narration that came with his chain from Waqi'i, that the mother of Sufyan al-Thawri, Sultan al-Muhaddithin, the Sultan of the Hadith masters, the mother, look at the thought process of the mother, said to him, my son, Sufyan al-Thawri became Sufyan al-Thawri, when you have written down 10 letters, then look, do you see an increase in yourself in khashya, in forbearance and in dignity? If you don't see that, then know that it is, or this knowledge will only harm you and not benefit you. And reflect on this in terms of our schooling. Is the knowledge, is what we are giving them, bringing them closer to that purpose? And the ulama spoke about different types of ma'rifah. There is the knowledge of acknowledgement, meaning everybody acknowledges there is, although people acknowledge there is a creator. This is shared by all people. But the ma'rifah that we want to instill is the knowledge of love, veneration, and reverence. And this constitutes the true essence of Iman. Somebody might say, what about akhlaq? Is akhlaq, for example, which often you see in vision statements, is it not a purposeful aim? I would say akhlaq is both the fruit and evidence of ma'rifatullah. Without it, knowledge remains abstract and servitude incomplete. Right? It is a fruit of, it is a consequence of. Because remember, akhlaq for us is not just external behavior and observances. It's not external ethics. That's one form. Because I could smile in your face the entire day, but inside I could be munafiq. Akhlaq is an inward manifestation of ma'rifatullah. Right? Now, then somebody might, and this hadith demonstrates that point. أكمل المؤمنين إيمانا أحسنهم خلقا وخياركم خياركم لنسائهم. The most perfect of, or the most complete of believers in faith are those who are best in character. Meaning, character is proportional to iman. The more khashyatullah, the more iman, the more true akhlaq as we understand it in Islam manifest. And the most important place to demonstrate that is in the house, with one's family. Because it's easy to be saints in front of everybody, but inside the house you could be Fir'aun. We don't want that. Now, against the purposeful aims, there are instrumental aims. These are not ends in themselves, but means, instruments that cultivate skills, reasoning capacities, and so forth in service of the purposeful aims. We can also call them supporting disciplines, such as literacy, numeracy, science, mathematics, social science, physics. They are not the purposeful aim. They cannot be seen as purposeful aim from our Islamic worldview, but rather they are the supporting, that should allow us to lead us to purposeful aims. Ibn al-Qayyim al-Jawziyya, for example, and many others said, Ma'rifatullah can be attained through two broad ways. One, التدبر في آياته في كتابه, to deeply ponder and contemplate on his ayat in his closed book, the Quran, والتدبر في آياته في خلقه, and التفكر, and to deeply consider and reflect and study Allah's open cosmos. In other words, the study of physics, maths, etc., is a way to lead you to understand the cosmos, which should lead you to know Allah. And equally, the study of the Quran, etc., should lead you to Allah Azza wa Jal. If those things don't, then it becomes a liability against you in the Day of Judgment. Right? 10 minutes, inshallah. So, are academic excellence and ma'rifah mutually exclusive? Certainly not. Islam enjoins ihsan in all pursuits, yet it reminds us that the true essence is ultimately measured not by academic achievements. I'm not saying disregard it, but I'm also saying don't focus just on it, but by proximity to Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala, servitude and akhlaq. Now, how do Islamic schools generally describe their purpose? Now, Shakil in 2018 summarized 81 studies collected through a systematic search of 12,535 sources. He wanted to look at how Islamic schools understand their purpose. And dare I say, if we don't know our purpose, then there is no direction. He found, and look at this, they're all instrumental. He said, always schools define themselves through academic excellence, religious instruction, cultural religious preservation, a safe place for Muslims, etc. These are not my words. But then I wanted to do a quick test. So I randomly selected 4 vision statements from schools in India, UK, Australia, and the USA. So you don't say I was biased. This is what they said. That is their own saying words. You look at that. What is the focus on? What's the focus on? Right? In the absence of a clear philosophical foundation, Islamic pedagogy, or a clear understanding of what Islam tells us about education, and if that does not become foremost, then everything else in the school follows. Hence the emphasis on on academic excellence, hence the emphasis on performativity, and so forth. I mean, I was struck back by, we strive to elevate the status of Islamic knowledge, ensuring it's regarded with the same importance as secular education. Seriously? That is. And there's always a confusion you find between aims, vision, mission, philosophy. In most cases, Islamic schools do not actually have a stated philosophy of education. And because we don't, we end up what? What do we end up doing? Adopting blindly and superimposing as the 3 examples I have given you. Now, if Islamic schools cannot distinguish purposeful aims from instrumental aims, or focus only on the latter, they risk becoming efficient but directionless, producing technically skilled graduates devoid of higher purpose. So, the intentional, what we are calling for is that an intentional alignment of instrumental aims with purposeful aims, so that it can foster the development of a balanced individual intellectually, spiritually, physically. And again, a third point, I guess, in tajdeed, that has to be done through the process of tarbiyah. Tarbiyah we see as the heart of the equation. For often, Islamic schools may be involved in ta'lim, or they may be involved in tadris, and may be involved in some ta'deeb, because often ta'deeb is misunderstood, but they're not involved in tarbiyah. And if there is one distinct difference between the Islamic educational philosophy and others, it is that the very actual process of education must lead to the tarbiyah of this person. It has to. I don't have time to talk about tarbiyah, but I have a session on that tomorrow, inshallah ta'ala. And tarbiyah has to be understood as a comprehensive, lifelong process. And if we understand tarbiyah, then everybody in the school becomes important, and everybody would have to play a role. And if we understand tarbiyah, then it's not just what you teach them in terms of ta'aleem and tadris, instructional learning, but it's how you say things, it's your acts, it's your behavior, it's your intention, it's the dua you make for them, it's your engagement with them in the classroom and in the corridor that will make a huge difference. Now, the other important aspect of tajdeed is teacher education must be aligned with Islamic pedagogy and the purposeful aims. Often teacher or professional development in Islamic schools is focused on certain aspects, as you know, and very little on how can we bring the entire school together so they can understand the philosophy of education and the purposeful aims. So if there's something that we should be doing, also it is this. Educator formation must be twofold, I believe. One, grounded in Islamic pedagogy, clarifying the why, what, and how of teaching, but also tazkiyah. For one cannot nurture what one does not possess. And I'll give you a few anecdotes for illustration. Imam Abu Hanifa, rahmatullah alayhi, the great Imam, rahmatullah alayhi, was walking one day in the streets. And he saw a boy playing in the mud. So he said to the boy, "Don't slip." Imam Abu Hanifa. He's not you or me or the teacher at the school. He says to a boy in the street, "Don't slip in the mud." So the boy, Allah Ta'ala almost inspires him to say to Imam Abu Hanifa, "You don't slip, because if you do slip, the world slips." That shook the Imam. And he said he just was taken aback. He didn't stand there and say, "Who the heck are you to tell me this? Don't you know who I am?" It said thereafter, Imam Abu Hanifa would not issue a fatwa until he spent 1 month on it, discussing it with all the ulama of his time. Because of the statement of a boy that he said, "Don't slip." Why? Because if you don't have it, you can't give it. I can't emphasize enough the importance of teacher formation, our teachers understanding what we're talking about. That is, فاقد الشيء لا يعطيه. If you don't have it, you can't give it. Umar bin Abdul Aziz, rahmatullah alayhi, I'll wrap up because inshallah. Umar bin Aziz, when he became Khalifa, al-wufud, the envoys came to him. And one of these wufud, one of these envoys, one of these groups was led by an 11-year-old boy who was the spokesperson of the envoy. And as he started speaking, Umar bin Abdul Aziz, who was in his 30s, he said, "Stop, you're a boy. Why are you speaking?" He responded to Umar in this way, radiallahu anhu. He says, "If it was about age, you should not be Khalifa. It is about what's in the heart and what is translated by how that is translated by the tongue." And so what's this? Is that a sign? Please, guys. All right. So he said then Umar bin Aziz says to a boy, he said, "Insahni, advise me." He said he advised him till he wept. Umar wept. Is this how we treat our children? Is this our relationship with them? Now, the other important thing, I'll just try to wrap up, is that our schools, I believe, should be involved also in as we are moving to Islah al-Fitrah. The fitrah has been corrupted, the rectification of fitrah. And there are some of the ulama, like the eminent Sheikh Al-Dadu, Jazallah Khair, for example, says, if we are to summarize the 3 main reasons for fasad al-fitrah, for the corruption of the fitrah, it is kibr, inad, and taqleed. I don't mean by that taqleed madahib, for example, but the blind imitation of society and friends. Kibr, inad, you find these 3 things are happening to our young people because of the pervasive society and this thing here. And with AI, it's going to become worse. So we have a responsibility to help realign that fitrah, or try to fix that fitrah through what we do, or we end up actually adding to it, to the disaster of the fasad al-fitrah. And this could be through cultivating humility against kibr. Again, how do you do that? That's something else. Encouraging critical reflection, guiding independent reasoning. Centrality of Arabic, we cannot underestimate Arabic. It has been underestimated. Arabic is not just a language of communication, it is the language of wahi. And Islamic schools have neglected this, and that has to be center in our tajdeed efforts. And so we have been doing this insight in many ways. It's important for Tajdeed I'm finishing in 1 minute. Tajdeed has to take place collectively at the Center for Islamic Thought and Education. We have been doing so in terms of research, national and international, university-school partnership. This is so important and so unique that unless we understand the problem, we cannot find solutions. Research allows us to do that. And we have had excellent research partner or school partnership in Australia. We have developed the grad cert and short courses in Islamic pedagogy for teacher formation. We are working to support others, like the other organizations. We have our annual Islamic Schooling Conference for Australia to discuss our own issues and to see how to move forward. And we have also come up with a stimulus paper. Outlines a road for Australian Islamic schools as a pedagogical resource to stimulate reflection, cultivate reconnection, and inspire renewal, leading to distinction. Finally, renewal, my friends, is a cycle. It is not linear, it has to be continuous. Clarify purpose, distinct philosophy of education that can lead us to a vision and a mission that can help us in our strategic plan, execution via messaging system, the curriculum, assessment pedagogy, review and renew, ask, are we true to our purpose? Are our graduates embodying tarbiyah? What needs preserving, what needs correcting, what needs adapting? Feed this reflection back to the clarifying purposeful aims, beginning the next cycle of Tajdeed. This order highlights Tajdeed as a dynamic cycle, not a one-off reform. وبارك الله فيكم وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وجزاكم الله خيرا.
Why the ulama you wanted to meet, they were reluctant to think about Tajdeed? Because as you mentioned yourself, that Tajdeed is an Islamic concept and it has mentioned in the Quran and Hadith as well. So what is the reason? First point.
Sorry, just what's the reason for what?
What is the reason of ulama to be aberrant to this term Tajdeed, whatever meaning they may take from it? But Tajdeed has been Islamic term and in Hadith has been mentioned. Why our ulama are reluctant to just participate in such a meeting where Tajdeed is being discussed?
Why the ulama are lectured to?
Yeah. No, sir. This is why they are
reluctant.
Why they are reluctant.
My apology, I didn't hear
Second
it.
point, sir. So if all the sciences which are not Islamic, they are that much, we should be cautious about adopting those. Why early Muslims have translated the books of the Greeks, where there was everything, not only Islam, not only theology, but even the philosophy.
Why they have focused on?
The books which were translated by the
Greeks.
During the time of Abbasids
Yes.
from Greek into Arabic.
What did they do? Sorry, you said they what? Focused on it or what?
Those books were full of all details about philosophy and Islamic elements. But they were not reluctant to translate those books. But why we are nowadays thinking that if some knowledge is found in the West or somewhere, so we should not adopt that in that way.
I see.
Yeah.
Jazakallah khair, yes.
Yeah, thank you.
Barakallah feekum. Jazakallah khair for these questions. Why aren't the ulama adopting Tajdeed? I think we can generalize. There are some ulama, mashallah ta'ala. In Tajdeed, of course, the scope of Tajdeed is very wide. Here I was talking about Tajdeed in Islamic schools. But Tajdeed is taking place in almost every discipline, in fiqh as we speak. There are majalis fuqaha, there are various councils of fiqh across the world, international councils and otherwise, local and international. And they are doing their own Tajdeed in terms of fiqhi issues. So I can't say that fuqaha or the scholars or ulama are not adopting Tajdeed. Here I was confining my discussion on we as Islamic schools need to adopt Tajdeed for the reasons I've mentioned. Secondly, as for you're right that the Islamic civilization were brilliant in appropriating the sciences and the knowledge of the previous civilizations, particularly the Greeks. And I didn't have time today. I could have given several examples about that in terms of astronomy, at least astronomy, and mathematics and philosophy. But the brilliance of the Islamic civilization and Muslims in the path actually demonstrates the point that I've just talked about, that whenever they appropriated those sciences, and I'm careful with my words, appropriated, not adopted. They appropriated those sciences and those knowledge. They did so with a very strong Islamic worldview foundation. They were solid, and they said essentially bring it on. And they filtered that knowledge through their own Islamic worldview lens that allowed them to retain that which was useful, beneficial, and merely harmless, and disregard, not destroy, but disregard that which contravened and contradicted the fundamental principles of Islamic worldview, right? That's what we have not done. And many scholars and Muslim thinkers have cautioned us about this, that when you take knowledge from the West, you are not just taking information, you are taking a worldview with you. And some said it is like a spider web. You think you are only taking one thread when you take one discipline, but you end up pulling the entire web. Hence the importance of having a strong understanding and Islamic worldview foundation, and in the case of Islamic schools, a very strong Islamic philosophy of education founded on our worldview to allow us to engage with other ideas, not to reject them, appropriate what we see as useful for ourselves, and put aside that which may be detrimental to our worldview and our purpose. Wallahu a'lam.
Thank you very much. We'll take a question from the sisters and we'll come back to the brothers, inshallah.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Jazakallah khairan, Professor Abdullah. It was very insightful to hear your presentation. I'm Egyptian, I'm a psychotherapist, and I am a parenting specialist. And I've been living here in Sri Lanka for 7 years. And what I can see in the schooling system, and also working with parents, that this is a minority country. And there's a lot of racism. And I'm sure that you've also met this in Australia or all over the world. And what happens here is that what the product of Islamic schools is a very good Muslim, but how those Muslims are blending in the society is not at its best. They're being ostracized. There are not the Islamic education system has not really, I mean, with thinking about the Western cultures or anybody who's different as like demonizing that idea that we should not be getting anything from the West, that we should not be looking at Western research, and we should only just focus on our Islamic knowledge and our roots. It's actually bringing out Muslims who are very good, who have a lot of Islamic knowledge, but then when you put them into the society as people who are supposed to be working, being part of the society, they don't blend into the society, and also they're ostracized, and you cannot see that exodus. While in Sri Lanka, there's the Christian schools, for example, are extremely strong. Muslim parents would choose to put their children in a Christian
school. Strong academically, you mean?
Academically, no, but not only academically. Also, they bring out people who have a more of a global mindset, who are able to deal with people from other religions. But with their Islamic knowledge and Islamic practices, this is where the issue comes. So what is your advice on this, and how can these two concepts be blended to bring out people who are rooted into their religion and into their Islamic culture and Islamic principles, but at the same time capable of dealing with today's world, and also capable of going out and taking part in the society and actually going up the ladder to be in leadership positions? Jazakallah khair.
Jazakallah khair. Yeah, if a deeper understanding of Islamic worldview and the philosophy of education would allow us to understand that seeking knowledge to understand religion as a science, the sciences of deen, Quran, Hadith, etc., the seeking of that and the seeking of other branches of knowledge that can allow us to become academically proficient, but also able to live in society by understanding the socio-economic political tensions out there. These two are not mutually exclusive. We have made them mutually exclusive because we, again, with due respect, have not necessarily understood the Islamic worldview of education and then ended up focusing on one at the expense of the other. That's what happens. Sometimes this happened in history, in contemporary history, in Islamic schools such as the madrasas, for instance, in response to and reaction to colonization for preservation of identity. And madrasas, for instance, and this is not a criticism, this is just some reflection, that when they used to be more inclusive in terms of their disciplines that they taught, in other words, they did not focus on religious sciences, but also they focused on mathematics and astronomy and logic and philosophy. And colonization did damage to that, and madrasas tried to become inward and isolated for preservation of faith, and that's why they rejected certain other aspects. I think the dilemma for us, and this is the tension, as I said, is trying to balance both. We won't be able to balance both until we go back to that deeper understanding of the philosophy of education from an Islamic perspective, but also this idea of empowering our students with that higher purpose, which by extension means also giving them that spiritual resilience. Islamophobia, racism, and world tension, ibtila and bala and fitan will never end. And we're not going to stop that. But how do we make our students able to engage with those challenges and difficulties constructively from within an Islamic worldview and from within an Islamic framework? For example, if we are able to instill in our students or help them in rectifying the fitrah in terms of arrogance, inad, stubbornness, and otherwise, and help them try to become confident in who they are, allow for themselves to define for themselves who they are and not to allow others to define for them who they are, I believe they will be able to engage with things like Islamophobia and racism more constructively. We won't eliminate it, and we cannot eliminate it, but we can engage with it constructively and with resilience if we understand, again, the philosophy of education, and that it does not prevent us from engaging with all sorts of sciences or branches of knowledge in a way that must serve the purposeful aim of our schooling. Allahu A'lam.
Jazakallah, thank you very much. We have 7 minutes left. So if you keep the questions very brief, and Professor will keep his answers brief, he'll be around with us for the next 3 days. You're most welcome to interact with him and try and get your answers, your questions answered, inshallah. So we'll try and speed it up. Go ahead, sir.
Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Ashar from India. During your presentation, you have mentioned about assessment 4 to 5 times. So if you can highlight what factors we should consider for assessment innovation. Because here everyone talking about curriculum innovation, but if you can specify what exactly should be our approach or methodology for assessment innovation. Thank you.
Yeah, no, that's, I won't be able to give you a very short answer for this, and Mr. Zafar will kill me. Dylan, you're presenting something, assessment. So Brother Dylan Chown, if you stand up and show yourself, the beautiful brother there, he will be giving a whole session on that. So if I may refer you to that, I'll do more justice. He will do more justice to this, inshallah. So just Dylan Chown, right, and you'll find his session, inshallah ta'ala. My apology, but he will do justice to that, because you need half an hour with him. 2 hours.
Thank you very much.
Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam.
Thank you so much for a very thought-provoking session. My question is very simple, that given the fact that we have a discrepancy between the Islamic ideals and the practices of the Islamic schools, what is the most appropriate and respectful terminology to use to refer to those institutions that are actually subscribing to Islamic values?
Sorry, just come closer to the mic.
Okay, I'm saying, what is the most respectful and appropriate terminology to use to refer to those institutions that are subscribing to Islamic values? Should we call them Islamic schools or should we call them Muslim schools?
It's interesting because madrasas, and in the Islamic civilization, madrasas were the high institutions of higher learning. There was the maktab and the kutab. Madrasas were very advanced, as a matter of fact. The interesting thing, they were never called Islamic. You know why? Because they were. Sometimes we get lost in labels. Islamic school, Muslim school, the proof is in the pudding, as they say. Call it the green school, I don't care. Or the blue school. What matters is the essence, right? And of course, the minute you call yourself an Islamic school or a school for Muslim children, you need to be very careful how you define that. And I say again, you will stand before Allah Ta'ala and He will ask you, you called yourself Islamic school, did you give the Islamic? But we mustn't get bogged down in labels and focus on the essence. Wallahu alam. Short answer.
It's very good, thank you.
Alhamdulillah. $5 for that. Usually $10 for the answer, but because it's short.
You can have an extra pastry at tea time.
Okay, thank you, Professor, for the inspiring speech, and I believe all of us share the same hum regarding this. But my question is, how can we address the constraints, and specifically the environmental constraints that are there, introducing this new philosophy and what it imposes later? Okay, because it's like you are introducing a fully new thing. However, there are many environmental, governmental constraints and
constraints, yes.
Yes, sociological.
No, it's interesting. People often ask that question about, and it is true, it's a practical reality that the schools are constrained by so many things. But then when AI comes and everybody feels, oh, we need to get on AI, we make time for it, صح? We find some way how to bring AI into even if we have to restructure things and go back to the board and have a quick discussion, we don't want to be left behind because AI is the trend. And we will manage to find some time and go back to the drawing board. But then when maybe it comes to Islamic pedagogy, we can leave that, we don't have room for that. This is your problem, not mine, to go back and if you believe in the idea. That's what I said. Well, we have to first believe and regain what is already ours. I swear to you, if you believe in the idea and think this is, you will go back to your board, you will go back to your leadership, and you will discuss it, and you will find a way. It's not my role or anybody's role to give you a school a specific way for this. You have, you know your own constraints, but you will find a way. I know schools that we've been engaged with. I don't want to name schools but they found a way. And they went back to the drawing board. And they said, this is our mission that we are going to take on board. And they went through a 3-year process or a 5-year process to shift. And you're beginning to see the results now in classrooms and in the conduct of the teachers and the impact of that on the students. If there is a will, there is a way, my friend. Wallahu alam.
Jazakallah. Thank you very much. We have a full 120 seconds for the question and the answer.
Jazakallah khair. I'm sure I share the same sentiments of my fellow colleagues, mashallah, for the excellent.
Just come too close to the mic.
Jazakallah. It's a shame, subhanAllah, that we have to be reminded of this. This is
That's
the key
right.
principle.
It is.
This is something that we should all live by anyway, so Jazakallah khair. You beautifully explained, how Tajdeed renews the lost aspects of Islam. But in that light, how do you see the revival of the waqf system?
Yes.
As a practical expression of Tajdeed, helping our ummah move away from traditional, depending on sort of regular donations, to a more sustainable community, inshallah.
Barakallah fi, excellent question. I alluded to this very briefly, and I said the waqf system was fundamental to the Islamic civilization, as you know. In fact, Wa'il Hallaq, he said the waqf, awqaf, the endowment system, was the glue that kept the Islamic civilization going. And that's why colonization, one of the first things they did was dismantle the waqf system. Awqaf is highly important because it can do a number of things. One, and when we do awqaf, we have to be very careful also not to end up investing our awqaf in things that others can invest in, right? For example, if you have awqaf and you decide, I want to go invest my awqaf in establishing a hospital, when the state government can establish a hospital, right? Strategically, first I should say, undoubtedly, awqaf is a must. Awqaf is part and parcel of Islamic civilization that kept it alive all these centuries. And importantly, awqaf in many ways was strategically directed towards what we may call today R&D, research and development, right? And so if there is an awqaf system in a particular state or country, then a specific agenda of that awqaf must be on this tajdeed of Islamic schools, which cannot happen just by wishful thinking, but rather conscientious, deliberate research partnership to understand the issues that we are facing and to find concrete solutions that are not based on emotional responses, but based on our strong foundation of our worldview and philosophy of education and the needs of time. And I must add also, which I forgot to do in my presentation, in doing so, we must not forget the role of the parents and bring them along. They are important partners in this journey, and don't also sideline the ulama who are well versed in our tradition, who can help us along the way also. We need all of them, and awqaf can. The other important thing about awqaf is that it can give us that independence, which is crucial in scholarship and has always been crucial. We need to be independent so that we're not relying on somebody else to allow us to move forward in our tajdeed. Wallahu a'lam. Barakallah feekum.
Jazakallah. Thank you very much, Professor Abdullah, for that insightful presentation.